So, I still don't have a title for this video yet, but it's going to be something about my experiences as being a victim of racism. I hate the word victim, but if I just say experiences with racism, I could be talking about my experiences where I've been racist too. And that's not what this video is about. But I have totally had, racist moments where I have victimized others. Nothing, I think, harmful to them directly. It's just been like my thoughts, not actions, really. But moving on. This is kind of a companion video, so this is more like a story time, talking about my experiences. But there is a video that I had this week, before this one, a conversation piece. It'll be found on that playlist that discusses how people forget that I'm brown and a person of color. So this is kind of a companion to that, although they are separate enough things. This is a story time, the other one's a conversation. But I would say if you're going to watch one, may as well watch the other because there's some overlap there. First thing we need to explain is what is explicit and what is implicit, because I'm going to use those words a bunch. When I say that someone has done something explicitly, it means that they have blatantly, like very obviously, boldly done something direct, that there's no bones about it. Like, if I were to compare that with, well, let me just talk about implicit. Implicit would be almost like subversive or subconscious. Something implicit is like under the radar. Maybe they don't even realize they're doing it, or this thing is happening implicitly, which is just it's not obvious. It is subtle. So explicit racism, someone throwing a rock in my face because I'm brown and they don't like brown people. Implicit racism is maybe someone watching me a little too closely in the grocery store without even realizing that they're doing it because I'm brown. And some other people you can explicitly do that thing too, because you'll be like, oh, that's a brown person, I better watch them closer. But sometimes people just like, because of the way that I don't know, culture is, the media they take in, the example that was set forth by maybe family members or who knows what, that is an implicit bias or implicit discrimination or whatever, but a subversive, subtle thing that maybe they don't even realize they're doing, or I guess they don't realize they're doing. So explicit and implicit, I'm going to use those terms, so there we go. So this is again just certain instances, and I'll get to the end to talking about these things a little more broadly, but the first thing that I can recall, and I will state, I'm 33 years old, so the first thing I can recall in my memory was a form of more explicit racism, but nothing that happened directly to me, so this is also questionable. But the first person I ever attempted to date when I was 15 years old, in this small town of Outlook, which I'm going to bring up again later, is a town of 2,500 people in Saskatchewan that I lived in from when I was 11 to when I was 18, and it is very white and very conservative. I think there was less than 10 families of color, and the rest were all just white people, Caucasian folks. So, yeah, it was a very white, very conservative, very old town, and I was none of those things. So, yeah, that was one thing. But anyway, this young Caucasian woman at the time that I attempted to date, we saw each other under the radar, but she had told me that I was, it couldn't be a very open thing in the aspect, like she didn't hide it from people at school or anything like that. We didn't really date very long. In fact, most times I don't even count her as a first girlfriend because it was short-lived, and we didn't really do anything other than start to get to know each other, and didn't really establish we are this thing, other than we are different from just friends, but it wasn't, I don't know how long, it probably only lasted like a month or two. In that capacity of trying to have a romantic relationship. Anyway, it was stated to me that her father would not appreciate me being at the home, and that I wasn't there when her parents were there, because apparently he was a racist man who would not appreciate his daughter seeing a brown man. So, however, I do acknowledge the fact that, hey, guess what? Maybe that's not true. Maybe there's another reason for whatever reason that she wouldn't want me around. However, this person is a friend of mine to this day. So I really don't think that was something. I don't think it was her telling me something to cover up something else. Yeah, so that's a thing. Moving on, in Outlook, again, about a year or two later, I was dating a very pale Caucasian woman, very blonde, very pale, no mistaking that she was a white woman, young woman. And when we were in high school, not at the same high school, but we were dating when I was about 17. And I just remember being downtown with her at like the pharmacy. We didn't even buy anything yet, but we were just walking and we were holding hands. And I remember this older woman, like a customer, just just looking at us, like turning around to look at us, and like making I don't know what to call it. I would have said like giving me the old hairy eyeball, but I mean just eyeballing us, and just like she didn't have a pleasant expression on her face. So I don't know what to call it, but she didn't seem very impressed. And there was nothing else I could think of about us that would draw attention. I mean, that shouldn't have even drawn attention, that we were an interracial couple holding hands, because we weren't engaging in any amorous behavior, other than just holding hands and talking while we walked down, I don't even remember what we were looking for in there, but we didn't even have any, it's not like we were carrying anything weird or we were dressed messed up. I don't know. So again, all I can do is assume it was because of us being an interracial couple. That is just my assumption. Unfortunately, that's what we're going to talk about sometimes with things like, and this would be like something that I wouldn't say was implicit necessarily, but it wasn't explicitly like, hey, I'm looking at you because you are brown and she is white. That wasn't said, but I just can't think of anything else. And that's the thing sometimes with being a person of color. Sometimes you attribute racism where racism isn't due, and things that you just can't think of any other reason. So you think about a bunch of stuff and you're like, I don't even know. And there's nothing really I can do about it unless someone explicitly, says this or that to me or behaves in a way that I'm confirmed that they are engaging in racist behavior. After that, I don't have very many examples for years and years and years, except for ones that again I would say, like, at times I've been in stores, whether it's Shoppers Drug Mart or wherever else, places where sometimes they have secret shoppers. And I've had this conversation with people. I've worked at Shoppers for years, like I think 3 years at 2 different locations, in the photo and electronics department. And anyway, so I was aware that yes, we have secret shoppers or mystery shoppers or whatever you want to call them. I mean, to some people that might mean different things, but basically we had security that was plain clothes security officers who would walk, especially one of the locations I worked at was open 24/7, that they would walk back and forth, and they would pretend to be shopping, and they would try to catch shoplifters. And there were times in my own store that I would go there after hours to purchase items, and I would have they change a lot, these secret shoppers or whatever, because they don't want anyone to catch on that that's what they're there for and who they are and whatever, because then people who are maybe trying to steal or be unsavory, that they would catch on to this and then change their behavior in front of those people. And then they would be like, oh crap, there's security here. Now I know that I'm not going to engage in those activities. But yeah, so they would change often. So sometimes people, if I saw them after hours, they knew I worked there, and other times they didn't. And there are times in my own store that I worked at where there was a secret shopper who just hung around me a little too long, and I would ask myself why. Like I'm in this aisle over here on one half of the store, and there's like 15 other aisles. Why are you hanging out over here, going back and forth, back and forth? Like, I know who you are. I know what you're doing. Like, there's no other reason. You're not buying anything right now because they weren't very good at their job, I guess, and trying to hide. But also, it was like I noticed it more than someone else might notice it, because I was like, yeah, I just have an awareness about me sometimes that people change their behavior because of the color of my skin. And some of those people were people of color as well. That does not prohibit them from being racist. Like I said, I have definitely thought about people in a racist way, and not something I'm proud of at all. But there are certain biases and certain I don't know if I would say discriminatory things that I engage in and obviously I'm trying to be more aware of that now than I ever have been. But definitely I've had racist thoughts about people, and that I'm a person of color, so it doesn't exclude me from that. Nor would it exclude these faux security guards. But there's been times where that's happened, and that happened. Like I said, this is stuff that happened. I wouldn't say frequently that I noticed it. I'm sure it happened more times than I noticed it. And there are times where I noticed it that maybe that wasn't it. But I didn't look like a scrub. Like I didn't look like, people attribute maybe someone's financial status to the fact like, oh, they look homeless and homeless people don't have money. And if there's a homeless person in here, they need to buy something, but they might not have very much money. So maybe they're going to steal something. I understand that line of thinking, but I like to think I don't look homeless. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think I've ever just like walked around looking like obviously homeless, because I'm not homeless, and nor have I ever been, fortunately. So then I attribute like, why are you looking at me that way? Why I'm not publicly intoxicated or under the influence of any substances. So what is it about me that you need to walk around and look at what I'm doing? And there were times I've been approached multiple times asking if I need help. And sometimes people are friendly and they just want to know if you want help, and other times it's more than that. And they try to disguise what they're doing by being like, oh, do you need some help with anything? And I'm like, no, I'm good. And then 5 minutes later they ask you again. Like sometimes I'm making a selection that's not an easy selection for me to make, and I'm just looking for something new or just like whatever, and I might be in the same aisle for a couple minutes because I don't know what I want. It's not because I'm waiting for people to leave so I can steal stuff. But that has happened numerous times in my life, but especially I think maybe my youth had something to do with it too, because people sometimes attribute age to shoplifting at times. So definitely in my late teens and early to mid-20s, it happened more often than it does now, for sure. So those are other instances that happened as well. Again, no one there is saying, hey, I'm watching you because you're brown. No one's saying that. But it is something that I can't think of anything else. And just because I can't think of it doesn't make it true or untrue or whatever. But I can't think of any other way, anything to attribute it to. So, next. Oh, yeah. So when I moved to Lethbridge 3 years ago, I've had this rant about the Facebook buy and sell pages beforehand. I've ranted about this because basically, my pet peeve is that my understanding is that these pages are for buying things and selling things, or trading things, or whatever, products, physical items, whatever. It's not a place to talk about your lost dog or ask how the highway weather is. And I found that people frequently did this, and it was very annoying to me, because if I'm putting an ad there to sell a painting, if someone starts cluttering up the feed with lost cats and dogs and asking how's the weather today, when you could just look on the internet. Obviously you can use the internet, you're on the buy and sell page, so you can easily access the highway weather report. Anyway, these are things that have always bothered me about buy and sell pages, and this is going to relate back in a second here. So yeah, 3 years ago when I moved here, there was an instance where I joined buy and sell page, the biggest, most popular one in Lethbridge area, and I got sick of it really quick. I just started posting to buy and sell pages more in Lethbridge than I ever did in Saskatoon for some reason. It just was, I found it better than Kijiji and more responsive, and so I was doing that. And I found that there was people who constantly were adding information that had nothing to do with buying and selling, therefore it was pushing my stuff down. And so at one point someone asked, how's the weather, how are the highways from, Tabor to Colehurst, something like that, or to Claresholm, I don't remember, but it was on the highway. And I mentioned politely, I'll say in air quotes, hey, you have the internet. This is a buy and sell page, and you have the internet, and you can look for this information yourself rather than asking the buy and sell page. And there was one of the very few times ever in my life, the only one that I can actually think of right now, there was explicit racism, what I would call racism, because there was this older Caucasian gentleman, I'm only saying this based off of his profile picture, who said, in Canada, we like to help each other out. Go back to where you came from. Well, I was born in Cardston, which is an hour away from Lethbridge. I was raised in Alberta and Saskatchewan, which is in Canada. So go back to where I came from when this comment was made to me was an hour away. And I never really lived in Cardston anyway. I pretty much, after a few months, was transported to Lethbridge, where I was currently. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. But the next thing that was interesting, which was another act of what I would assume to be racism, was that the person who founded the page, who operated the page, who was an admin of the page, they kicked me out of the page. And I had another profile, and I looked, and the other person who was making racist comments towards me was still on the page. So from my profile, I messaged the admin of that buy and sell page and said, could you please tell me what I have done to deserve this treatment? Why would you kick me off the page rather than the person who was engaging in racist behavior and telling me to go back where I came from? I never received a response, and that was that. So yeah, that was annoying and interesting, and ultimately what I learned from that experience is to just shut my face, and people are going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to comment and stuff on the buy and sell pages, and just like I shouldn't ever engage in any type of online discussion because there are people who can't actually have a discussion or see things from a rational and logical point of view and instead get emotional. I mean, I get emotional too, I'm not a robot, but when things are clearly based in fact and there's no disputing them, people sometimes go to their emotions, which would be apparently, we like to help each other out here. Okay, go post your lost dog in the lost pets page. Maybe you'll get some responses there. Don't clutter up, this space is for this one thing, so let's use it for that thing. And it would work better to everyone's advantage who is in that group. Other than the person who is trying to get more answers and responses and whatever, to me, I compartmentalize things, and I'm seeing it from a standpoint of someone who's trying to sell a product and want as many people to see it as possible. And if it's getting pushed down all the time in the feed because people are talking about the weather and their lost dog, that's frustrating to me. So anyway, that is the only experience I could recall from my memory of very explicit racism in that aspect. And it wasn't physically harming me in any way, and I'll get to that kind of stuff in a minute. There is one other form of, unfortunately, this is going to be somewhat polarizing and disagreeable to some people, what I would call implicit racism, that happens to me so often since before I can remember it happening, before I ever labeled it as racism. It happens to me, I can't count on how many times even a year it happens to me. And that is my name. Now, I've had this discussion with friends and family before, about this, and not very often because I know that people don't see it the same way I do, but I'm going to explain it. So my first name is John. Out of all my four names, it is the only name that is very, I don't know what you would call it, Anglo-Saxon. It is very a Caucasian name in a way. Caucasians use the name. Yes, it's not a very Hispanic name traditionally. So, my other three names are, so my middle name and my last name is two last names hyphenated. Two of them are very, very, very stereotypically Hispanic. So, incredibly so, that automatically you would think of someone who is Latin, a Latino, Latinx, whatever you want to call them, that yes, you would automatically assume, oh, this is a person of Latin descent or Hispanic descent or whatever. You would just assume that based off of two of those names. The other name is not a very common name, and it doesn't sound Hispanic either, but it's definitely not a Caucasian name, and that is Mikel. And I'm not specifying their names for a reason, but it's like if you heard the name Sanchez, or Juan, or Pablo, or I can't even think of other names right now that would just be that are coming to me as that's a real Spanish name, or like a Mexican name, or a South American name, or Central American name. There's just certain ones that you're like, okay, yeah, that person's probably going to be Hispanic. Gomez or something. Anyway, well, maybe not Gomez. Anyway, something like Sanchez, I would assume. Okay. So Miquel, Miquel, that is how that is spelled. So when I have to fill out documents that involve my name, they ask for my full name the majority of the time that I have to fill out any documents or papers, or I'm getting hired somewhere, or replying to this place, or they need my information for this thing, whatever it is. Most of the times this is done digitally now, so I can type it, and sometimes I have to write it by hand. And whenever I write my name by hand now, I do it in all caps, because I try to give people the benefit of the doubt that when my name, like the first part of my last name, Miquel, M-I-Q-U-E-L, when it's in lowercase, just a capital M and the rest is lowercase, some people might, I used to just try to make my lowercase q very obvious that it's a Q, but some people still assume it's a G. Now the only reason I bulk this in with implicit racism is that Miguel with a G is a very stereotypical Hispanic name. Usually a first name, not a last name, but regardless, people would associate that with Hispanic people more than they would with African American people or Caucasian folks. So they see my middle name, they see the last part of my last name, which are very stereotypical Hispanic names, and they just assume, oh, they didn't mean Miquel, they meant Miguel. This upsets me every time it happens, because I spelt my name right on the form. So when I get something back from them that has my name on it, and they change the spelling, it's really frustrating. One, you can copy and paste my name, you don't need to spell it out yourself. The Q and the G, now I'm worried that I'm wrong. Yeah, so the Q and the G are nowhere near each other on the keyboard, on a traditional QWERTY or whatever keyboard layout for your phone or desktop or PC or what have you. So that's not a thing either. It's not just a typo that coincidentally everybody gets wrong. My name is spelt wrong all the time in different ways. My first name is spelt wrong. Other parts of like my middle name is usually spelt right, the only one. And my last name is spelt wrong sometimes. But this Q and G thing happens. If my name is ever spelt wrong, that's the way it's spelt wrong 99% of the time. Usually, overwhelmingly, it's the only way that it's spelt wrong. Sometimes I've had people spell my full name wrong 3 different ways. Like 3 different names are spelt wrong, and that's just a whole other mess that I wouldn't attribute to the implicit racism I'm talking about. But the thing is that people just, you assume that I spelt my own name wrong, so it also offends me on a level of intelligence, because I filled out a form, and whether I wrote it by hand or I typed it for you, if I can do it in all caps, I do it in all caps. You cannot mistake that is a capital Q. It does not look like a capital G, the same way that a lowercase g and a lowercase q could be maybe confused. I mean, I make it very obvious that the tail is going to the right, not looping up to the left, like back into itself. Like, to me, it's obvious. It's an obvious difference when I do it that way too, but people just didn't get it, so I do it in all caps as much as possible, whether I'm typing it or I'm writing it manually. And people still give me back documents with my name spelled with a G instead of a Q. And again, sometimes they never even see my face. Sometimes they do. The thing is that the other 2 names are very stereotypically Hispanic. Therefore, I assume that they assume, oh, it must be Miguel. Or they just don't, they don't even, maybe they don't think, oh, he made a mistake on his own name, I'll correct it for him. Maybe they're not doing that. Maybe just the way that they're just like, it's this, Miguel, this. Like, they're just like doing it without even thinking about it, because they have registered the fact that I am probably of Latin descent. And this just bothers me so much, because it is not just once or twice or whatever. It is not every single time. But overwhelming. Like, it's maybe 75% of the time, if not more, that I have to do any paperwork. And then the paperwork gets brought back to me in some nature. That my last name, that the Q and the G are like, that M-I-Q-U-E-L is now M-I-G-U-E-L instead. Actually, this is the reason I decided to have this whole conversation today. I mean, this whole story time, and the conversation that I had earlier about people not recognizing I'm brown, is because this happened to me just today. This happened to me just today via email. Again, this person never saw me at all, but every other part of my name was right, and the thing was that I had given them a typed, like, I filled out a form, a document, I sent it to them, and it was typed out, and my name was spelled correctly, because I don't spell my own name wrong. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but I don't, and I double checked, and I didn't, And they sent it back with everything spelled right, all four of my names, except for the Q was replaced with a G. And I know I'm harping on this, but this is something that happens to me all the freaking time. Is it harmful to me? No. No, it's just annoying. It's just really annoying. But it is a constant reminder of the fact that people, like I said, it's insulting on an intelligence level. Like, you think that I spelled my own name wrong? Why wouldn't you just trust my whatever? Or, again, it's maybe the fact to give them benefit of the doubt, which I hate doing. But maybe it's just like, oh, they didn't even realize they did it. But the fact is, there's something within that person that is just attributing, oh, they're a Hispanic person, so I'm just typing the name the way that it makes sense to me. Like, I don't know. Anyway, it's frustrating. And I want to wrap this up by saying I am very lucky, and that even within the context of Alberta, Canada, or when I was in Saskatchewan, I do not face racism in a way that other people do. These examples I've given you are so mild in comparison to what other people go through. Like I said, none of these things, I've never been beaten up because I've been brown. I've never been engaged in a fight, hardly ever, but definitely it wasn't because of racism. So I don't feel like, my property has been damaged, that I mean, there's things that maybe I know that I don't know about. Maybe someone's looking at my application forms and being like, oh, that's a Hispanic person, we're not going to hire them. But not to my knowledge. I don't think that necessarily I get targeted by the police more because I'm brown. I think I've engaged in some illegal activities in my youth, and therefore have paid the consequences for those things, and at times been caught by the police. But I don't think I've ever been unjustly approached by the police, and therefore started to question why. There have been times where I was out doing the graffitis, and I got pulled over. Like, I was walking and they pulled me over, and I was like, I never thought, oh yeah, I'm brown in this weird neighborhood, or in a rich neighborhood, and I'm out of place. Maybe that's why they're pulling me over. It may be because somebody had called them. I don't know. Fortunately, I have not had many really negative, crappy experiences that I can 100% attribute to racism. Like I said, it has not negatively impacted my life in a way that others are negatively impacted probably daily. Again, that is also because, and I went into much detail about this in the People Forget That I'm Brown video or podcast, depending on how you're consuming this format, into this whole thing of, like, I was raised in Canada, I was, like, my knowledge is white, and I explain what that means there a little bit more, and therefore maybe people read me just differently than they would read someone who arrived here today from Africa, and they are very, very dark complexion and extremely African American, culturally looking, style, everything. Like, there's so much about me that is my diet, the way I dress, whatever, like the lack of accent, that despite the fact that my skin color and my hair and all these things may be like, oh yes, that is a person of color, and my name, obviously, that I'm not treated the same way as other people, that may be fresh immigrants that also look and smell and talk differently than a lot of the people here, because a lot of those things, like, I don't pass for a Caucasian person, because I am not. Very visibly I am not. My name says that I'm not. But if someone's just speaking to me on the phone, maybe they make certain assumptions or whatever. Or, if I'm speaking to someone on the phone, maybe they won't notice. Or I'm emailing someone and it doesn't have my name attached to it, then maybe they don't notice, or they just assume that I'm white. I don't know. But like I said, I recognize the fact that I even have white privilege. And that is because my knowledge is white. And again, I explained more in that other video. Like I said, this wasn't meant to be like, poor me, look at all these things that I experienced. But it was kind of more to get to this point that I only have a list of like 5 things that I can talk about of how I've noticed people be racist towards me. I acknowledge there are other times, 100%, that someone has had racist thoughts about me, had racist actions towards me, and maybe discriminated against me, but I didn't know about it. And that's the thing about being a person of color, is that a lot of the time, you will never know if that happened because of this or it happened because of that. Or you won't even know that something happened or didn't happen the way it was supposed to, because you just don't know that all the time. But I'm very aware that I'm very fortunate and privileged and not just because of my my white privilege, which is a weird thing to say, but also just I don't know, because of the way that I dress, because of the way that I talk, because I was raised this way, which all that has to do with like my knowledge being white and my culturally being very Canadian, Caucasian in a way. It's hard to unpack that, but again, in that other video, I explained this more in depth. But I do recognize, like, you know what? I'm very aware of my race. I'm very aware of the potential scenarios I could be in based on my race. And especially being now in Southern Alberta versus Saskatchewan, I feel my race more here than I did then. I feel like both provinces have a lot of racism, but in different ways. I was talking to this about someone today about how I found way more racism towards Aboriginal people in Saskatchewan than I do in Alberta. And in Alberta, I see way more racism towards people of color, specifically like other people of color that are not Aboriginal people than Aboriginal racism. There's a lot of that too, no doubt about it. But I see way more things based off of like immigrants moving here that are people of color and what have you. Anyway, in both provinces, like I said, I'm very fortunate. People, don't target me as much in such a way that I notice, and this is something that I deal with on a daily basis, that is just a negative thing in my life that I have to go through. However, I will say too that I don't want to go to the States. I mean, I've been to the States. I went there in 2006, and then things were different. Things were very different, and I felt way more. I didn't even think about it. I really didn't think about it that much, if at all. I mean, that was so long ago now that who can say what my thoughts were, but I don't remember feeling the fear that I feel now if I were to go across the border for whatever reason, just to go for a trip, go for a hike, or go to a concert, or go to the museum, or you know what I mean? Like, the border's very close, but I feel much more fear now than I did then, and that is purely based off race and culture, and like U.S. culture versus Canadian culture even. I feel much safer here than I do there, purely based on my race and my color. I don't really know what else I have to say about it. Again, this is mostly just talking about things that have happened based off race. It's been brought to my attention in the past year too, because I've had questions about like, how come you never get political in your artwork, or you don't talk about race in your art, and you talk about all these other things. And it's because it's not something that happens so often that I feel important to talk about. My art is very personal, and my race is personal to me, but it's not something I think about in this way all the time, because I don't find myself getting discriminated against and attacked and everything else because of my race in such an explicit manner that I feel the need to talk about it and whatever else. That's again why I decided to put these two videos out in the same week. It's not something that I address very often. I'm aware of it, and I live it, but it's just not something that I get into very often. So I thought that I would bring that up, have a little story time, companion piece to the conversation. These are just my experiences with racism in Canada, which again are just nothing compared to anyone else's. I'm very aware of that. But it opens up a conversation a little bit, and again, companion piece to the conversation I have about why people forget that I'm brown. With that, we will see you on another time.